shorten. If this calcium right here never gets released, then the muscle does not shorten. So that's my cellular response. I don't have any muscle contraction with that. Neurotransmitter releases the same way. This calcium release into the cytosol at the end of the neuron causes the neurotransmitters to be spit out of the cell. That's my cellular response. So no increase in calcium, no neurotransmitter release. Okay, so both cyclic AMP and calcium ions can act again as second messengers. So these are the molecules inside of the cell that are really making that pathway go, really making that transduction pathway get amplified and get moving. Okay, so let's back up just a little bit and talk about this transduction pathway a little bit more. So remember, this is step 2 in our cell signaling. This is our in-between process. Receptor's been signaled, but the cellular response hasn't actually happened. Okay, so the point of this transduction pathway is it's going to convert the signal into essentially into a message that the cell can do something about. So it's into a signal that can actually cause a cellular response. So it's kind of a signal conversion process. So it's converting it into something that can cause actually cause the cellular response. And it's going to do this usually by using what are called protein kinases. Okay, you can't see that very well. That's a kinase. So a protein kinase. And a protein kinase are basically things that can transfer phosphate groups from ATP to other proteins. It can phosphorylate other proteins. You'll see, here we go, I'm phosphorylating all these proteins. That's what's making them active. They're inactive over here, and they become active over here when they get phosphorylated. So the protein kinases transferring those ATPs that phosphate from those ATP groups to other proteins. And what happens with this cascading effect here is it's going to increase my number of proteins that are activated. And if I increase my number of proteins that are activated, that's going to amplify the effect of the original one little molecule that came in and signaled. I've now amplified this pathway by activating multiple proteins here. Okay, so let's take a look at the response here. What are some of the options that a cell can do? So a cell has a variety of things that it could do in response to the signal transduction pathway. Okay, so it could just be a single response like in enzyme activation. So a single pathway response, it just turns an enzyme on, turns an enzyme off. Okay, so that could be a possible response of the cell. Okay, it could be now that you've activated the gene. Okay, so you could do a gene activation, which would be a little bit different than activating an enzyme that's already present, turning that on and off. With a gene activation, you've gone and you've affected the DNA, and so you're causing an enzyme or a protein to be made. Okay, so you're activating the gene here. Okay, you've also got the fact that the pathway could branch here. Okay, so the pathway could branch and you could have multiple responses within the cell. Okay, you could also have the pathways essentially talk to one another. Okay, and so the pathways themselves could interact with one another. Your cells are going to be able to have a variety of responses. Okay, and cells have a variety of responses because they have different proteins in them. So different cells, different proteins. Let's talk about your body because we like our body because it's easy to understand. Okay, in your body, the cells in your body have the exact same DNA. Okay, remember, they all start with the same materials. It's what genes in that DNA are turned on and what are turned off. And so based on what's turned on and what's turned off, you're going to get different cells, different proteins. Okay. And so with these different cells, different proteins, that can elicit a different response. You can have the same signal come in. For example, let's go back to epinephrine. Epinephrine, like I said, helps that fight or flight response. And so one of the things you need to do for fight or flight is you need to take in more air. And so epinephrine signals the tubes of your lungs, your bronchi, to dilate, to get bigger. And it relaxes the muscles that are in those tubes so more oxygen can come in. However, when epinephrine binds to the muscle cells on the hairs of your skin, when you get all kind of jazzed up like that, your hairs of your skin will stand up. That's due to a muscle contraction. So epinephrine can stimulate either muscle contraction or muscle relaxation, but it all goes back to what proteins are in that particular cell. Okay, so different cells can have different reactions to the exact same signal. Let's look at a plant example here of a pathway, just kind of walking through the response here. So I've got my, in this case, light. Okay, light is my signal. Okay, and so here's my receptor that it's activating. It's activating this phytochrome receptor. Okay, and so that phytochrome receptor activates multiple pathways. It activates the second messenger pathway, okay, as well as opening up that calcium channel. Okay, so that receptor activates two pathways. It branches and activates multiple pathways. Here's my signal transduction pathways here. I'm activating these protein kinases. Those protein kinases then cause the cellular response. Okay, and so here's my response. Okay, I'm causing gene expression. I'm producing the genes that cause the greening response. So I had one signal come in, cause multiple pathways, and so I get a coordinated cellular response here. The last thing I want to look at here is something called a scaffolding protein. Okay? Scaffolding proteins are really big proteins. You see it's this big pink one, significantly bigger than the others. Really large relay proteins that other relay proteins can attach to. Okay, so here I've got a bunch of these protein kinases, those relay proteins that send my signal on through my transduction pathway. And so I've got one large protein here attached to lots and lots of these other smaller relay proteins. And this can even better increase my efficiency of that cellular transduction pathway, that signal transduction pathway, because I can group together all these proteins may need to be involved in the same biological pathway. But here now I can get them all grouped together. Okay? I just need the one signal. The receptor only has to signal the scaffolding protein, which then scatters that message out to all the rest of those relay proteins. So it can make that transduction pathway happen a little bit faster and be a little bit more efficient. Okay. So when y'all come in on Tuesday, we are going to be creating some models to help you remember how these different protein receptors work and how those cells are going to be able to talk to one another.